So we spent quite some time here on the sign up process, but therefore we already got a nice error handling step here in place, which is not too bad. But now it's of course also time to sign users in and not just up. And of course our UI doesn't change on whether the user signed up or in at the moment. That's also something we'll take care about. But first of all, let's make sure we can send a request to the login endpoint as well. For that, in the auth service, let's start by adding a new login method, and login also takes an email and also takes a password, which should also be a string, unsurprisingly. And in login, we still have to send a request. Let's check out which URL we should send it to. Here in the Firebase auth REST API, if we want to sign in, this is the request, the URL we should send the request to. It should be a post request, as you can tell. And therefore, let's, in the login method in the auth service, use the Angular HTTP client and send a post request to that URL. Now again, that API key needs to be replaced, and therefore, obviously, we use the same API key as up there for signing up. Let's grab that and replace it down there, including the square brackets, just like this. And this login request also takes an email, a password, and this return secure token key as a request body. And that, of course, is the exact same body as we have here for signing up. So I can just copy and paste it from there, just like that. This will now send such a HTTP request. Let's see which data we get back. For that, in the official docs, we see we get almost the same response as we got it for signing up, but there is one extra field, the registered field, which is a Boolean, and therefore, to be able to use that same auth response data interface, I'll add registered here, but add a question mark to indicate that this is optional and a Boolean, because the sign up request will actually not yield it, but the login request will yield it. So now here on logging in, I will also add the angled brackets after post and inform TypeScript about the request response data we'll get back, that this is of type auth response data. Now, just as for signing up, I want to return this observable so that we only prepare it here, but we can then subscribe in our auth component. And therefore now in the auth component, here we have our logic for sending that sign up request. In the isLogin mode, we therefore now can reach out to auth service login and also forward email and password here. And then we have pretty much the same logic as down there. So I can grab this subscribe block here and also use it up here, because in the end, I want to control my loading state and the error. And since it is the same subscribe block, of course, we can write this a bit differently and not repeat ourselves here. We can simply create a new variable, auth ops for auth observable, which will in the end be of type observable, a type you need to import from RxJS. And that observable is a generic type, which means we also have to identify which kind of data this will yield eventually. And that data will, of course, be our auth response data. And therefore, now we actually need to export this auth response data interface so that we can import it into the auth component and be really clear that this auth response data will be yielded here by that auth observable. And for that, you, of course, also need to import auth response data from the auth service file. Now, why do I create that auth observable variable here, though? The idea is that we simply change the observable this variable holds in our two branches of this if check here. But at the end, after this if check, at least one of the two observables will be stored in there, or exactly one of the two. But we know that there will be an observable stored in that variable. And therefore, we can then just subscribe on that observable here after this if block, like this, and only change what's in the observable inside of the if block. So for example, here for logging in, we could set auth ops equal to this auth service login without calling subscribe here. And for signing up, we set auth ops equal to this auth service sign up without subscribing here. Can get rid of that code here, because that subscription code now lives below the if-else statement, because we know that after the if-else statement, at least one of the two observables, or exactly one of the two, but certainly one of the two, will be stored in auth-ops, and therefore subscribing to it is safe. And then since we want to do the exact same things upon subscribing, control the loading state and set the error, we can share the code and reduce the code we write here. So now we should also have our login route in place. Let's give it a try. So here for the user, which I already created, let me enter the credentials and click login. And this response looks quite good. Now let's try a user we haven't created yet, test2. And now I get object here as an error. Now that doesn't look too helpful. So we certainly need to work on the error handling logic. But besides that, it's working. So let's now take care about the error handling logic. The problem, of course, is that for logging in, we don't use the error handling logic we use for signing up. And therefore, we get the full error response, which we try to output as a message. Hence, we see object here. Now, actually, it would be nice to share that error handling logic between both observables. So between the sign up and the login observable. And that, of course, is possible. We can create a new private method here in the auth service. Private because we'll only use it in that service, which we could name handle error, and where we get an error response, which is of type error response. HTTP error response to be precise. And that is imported from @angular/comment/HTTP. So I get that response here, and in there, I want to have that code. So I want to basically dive into the response, check it, and then throw a new error observable. So I copy that entire code into the handle error method, where I set up let error message, then check the error response for the error field, and then for the nested error field. Then we have that switch statement, and we in the end return a new thrown error in an observable, either here or here. Now, instead of setting up this anonymous method up there, we can pass this handle error into catch error. And this handle error refers to this private method here. So now we have this central place for handling errors, or this central function, and we use that here. We can now use that same pipe with catch error on our login observable here. So there I add that exact same pipe. This means that this handle error function now runs for both observables that are related to signing up, as well as for observables that are related to logging in. And therefore now if we save this, we should see a different error message if we try to log in with a user that doesn't exist. Now we see an unknown error occurred. And it makes sense that we see this message because in our handle error function, we only handle the email exists error here in this switch case statement. Now we can simply add more cases, because for logging in, you see common error codes are email not found or invalid password. And I guess it would make sense to handle these two cases since they look relatively common. Important, of course, if you don't want to give any hints away, whether the email or the password was the wrong thing, you can, of course, also handle both with the same error message that doesn't give any hints. Here, I will be more specific to practice this a bit better. So let's break here after this case and then handle the email not found case, where I will set my error message to this email was or does not exist, then break, and then add another case for invalid password, like this, where we can set the error message equal this password is not correct. Again, you could use the same error message for wrong password and wrong email to give no hint away for what of the two things was wrong to enhance security. But here I want to be specific because this allows us to better practice this all, I guess. Now with this tiny change in place, which I guess already shows the magic of using that central error handling logic, we don't need to change anything anywhere else. We only added two new cases to this handle error function and we're done. So with this simple change, if I now try to log in for a user where the email address doesn't exist, we get the email does not exist. And now if I take the existing email address but a wrong password, I get the password is not correct. So our error handling is working, and we got the sign up and the login route in place. The next step, of course, is to finally start using that login data, start storing that token, and adjust our user interface to the current authentication status of the user.